So I'd like to introduce this next session, which is really focusing on the future. And part of what I was asked to do, and what this panel is designed to do, is really to think about bridging the past with the present time, and also looking toward the future. I found two great quotes that I think kind of sets the standard for what the panelists and we are needing to address going forward. The first one is by Steve Jobs, and he says, "You can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life." And I think it's actually made the difference really in CPR's life and the work that we've done. The other one is a little more humorous, and it's by John Legend, who says, "The future started yesterday and we're already late." So that's kind of the urgency that we feel when we try to think about what we do. And anyway, just wanted to kind of start off the panel with that in mind. Each of the panelists today, with the exception of Allison, basically started their work and their at least work with the center here in Massachusetts. Bob Agoli worked with Mike Hogan. He was one of our defendants. You know, he's described the various roles he's had within the center, but we've had a really rich past and present time working with Bob, and look forward to his contributions to the center, which have been many, continuing into the future. Ruby Moore worked for the Department of Mental Health, coordinated one of the region's activities around employment services, and then set up one of the more innovative employment programs in the state, and ran that for a while before leaving Massachusetts and ultimately becoming the director of the protection and advocacy program in Georgia called Georgia Advocacy. She's done many things. She's been an expert who's worked with us in the Lane case in Oregon, and we look forward to finding other ways of continuing to work together in the future. Allison Barkoff is newest to the center. We've worked with Allison over many years during her tenure at the Department of Justice, and also while she was at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law. I have in particular had a kind of inner sense that Allison was supposed to work with us, and so I really unrelentingly sought her out, and finally, sort of the timing worked for everyone, and she's joined our office most recently in September. We asked Allison to be on this panel before she ever agreed to come work for us. So we decided that since we thought she had a lot to say of value about the center's future, that we should let her stay on the panel. So anyway, and then Michael Kendrick, who was actually recruited to Massachusetts and originally to work doing values-based training and normalization training here in Western Massachusetts as a result of the Brewster case. And his work expanded to include working in the mental retardation system, as it was referred to at the time, as well, training staff and doing a very extensive program of values-based training that probably was pretty much unprecedented for any other region, perhaps other than Nebraska. So Michael now spends his time as an international disability consultant, and we're also very pleased he's here. So,
thank you, Patty. So I'm going to start from the perspective of a board member, and one of the concerns that we talk about from pretty regularly as a board is how to sustain the workload that the center consistently maintains over the course of the time, at least, that I've been involved with the organization. Again, it's a very small, I believe we're 14 staff, if I've got that right, or somewhere thereabouts. And just to give you a flavor for what these 14 people are engaged in, right now the center has 12 active cases in various stages of litigation. And that includes 4 that are just at the very beginning stages, which is a very work-intensive stage for cases. And these cases are spread out in 7 states plus the District of Columbia. And all of them involve systemic reform remedies to replace segregated and or congregated services. In addition, the center has a Social Security project that represents individuals. We have work that we do here on a legislative and policy level in Massachusetts, and we have the Supported Decision-Making Project. And now we recently made a decision to add a national policy initiative to the toolbox, if you will, of strategies for securing the rights and dignity and well-being of people with disabilities. So this is an incredible range and depth of activity, and one of the challenges that we will face as we go forward in the next decade is continuing to find the talent, the people who have the talent and the passion for this work, because to sustain this kind of workload really requires a level of commitment, a level of passion about this work that will, in a sense, give people the energy and, the motivation to continue to carry that kind of a workload. And so it's no secret here as we look around, we've got one of the 3 sort of, we think of original leaders of the organization, Bob Fleischner, who is going to be heading into retirement. No one knows how long Stephen will continue at the pace he's at. Kathy's the youngster here, and Allison is the kid, and then we have a whole range of other staff. But we have to find leadership. We have to find leadership succession that will be a very serious challenge, given the threshold that we have for both the level of commitment as well as talent that's required to do what we do. And I'm really very proud of the fact that CPR underwent a succession process from its founding director, Stephen Schwartz, to our current director, Kathy Costanzo. And that, for anybody who's familiar with organizations and the life of organizations, that's a very tricky transition in the life of an organization. That is, to go from founders and to move smoothly into a different role for the founder than what he or she had within the organization. And I look at what has happened here as incredibly successful in my view, and an incredible model for that to happen. Now, there will continue to be, and we have in place a number of activities where we have been very intentionally trying to find the kind of talent that we need on an ongoing basis, legal talent and otherwise, to sustain the mission and vision of this organization. But it will continue to be a challenge. This is a unique niche in the practice of law and in the practice of advocacy. And as I said earlier, our level of expectation is very high. And so throughout our organization, we can't afford to have a weak link in this organization. And we have been very blessed with the talent that has worked in the past and currently have worked with us in all different functions within the organization. Because it's not just the folks who, as you know, are on the front line arguing the cases or giving testimony or what have you. Back in the office, we need to have the kind of very, very thorough and very competent support to make sure that the organization can continue. So I want to just point to the challenge of succession, the succession of leadership within the organization that we face as an organization. You'll hear more, I'm sure, from Allison about the National Policy Initiative, but the integration of this initiative into the work of CPR is another huge challenge. And I say that because we have used the strategy of policy advocacy. We have used it here in Massachusetts, and we continue to use it here in Massachusetts, but I think everybody understands that on the national stage, it's a little different. This is going to be another one of those developmental activities for the center to be able to embrace, incorporate, to fully integrate this new initiative into the work of the organization, and to really derive from it the synergy that in fact is there, the potential that is there for the work that we do on the litigation side and on the policy side to really feed one another. So that's another one of those challenges. I think that the supported decision-making project is another one of these. It's like I think of it as a demonstration project. It involves a different level of involvement in trying to figure out how something can work as an alternative to guardianship that will in fact ensure the rights of people to make decisions about their lives, but to do that in a way that is not simply replacing another form of substituted judgment into the lives of people that we're doing this with. And you know, what I've learned so far in the supported decision-making work that we've done is that it always depends upon the involvement, the commitment, the understanding of the people immediately surrounding the individual with a disability who is the focus for all of this. And to be able to work in a way that supports those people, that educates those people to do this in a meaningful way, and that will sustain their involvement with the individual over the course of many years. This is a huge undertaking. And so this is a very important project. I think we heard a little bit about that in the video. I don't underestimate by any means the level of work that's going to be involved in this, and the level of thinking and expertise that the center will bring to it. I'm not going to go on with much more. I could name a couple of areas where I wish the center would get involved in whole new areas, and yet I realize that we need to continue to work to eliminate segregated and congregated institutions for people with disabilities, because even though we'd like to think we're in a post-institutional society, we're not. And institutions still exist, even in the form that we eliminated many here in Massachusetts. They exist in that form, and they also exist in more subtle forms, and some of that has always been and continues to be the work of the center. But it's like, it's out there, it's still there, so there's a lot more of that to do. And in addition, as I think about some of the other things that are sort of interesting to me anyway, I often wonder about the patterns of racial discrimination that exist in our service system. I can't help but feel, at least in my experience here in Massachusetts in the service system, it seemed to me that most of the folks that I was involved with, this may not be true everywhere, were white, and I can't help but wonder about what is that all about, and what's going on here, and is there something that we should be looking at. And the last thing that I just want to name, and it's one of those things that I'm not sure lends itself to our litigation strategy, but it might lend itself to more of a policy advocacy strategy. Any family that has a child with a disability, or actually any family that has a child who's different in some way knows what it's like for that child to be bullied when they're going through school. It's painful, and it's pretty damaging in the lives of many people. And it just seems to me that there is an obligation, if we want to really have a society that doesn't value bullies, and of course, right now, there are probably 40 million people who are going to vote for one. But if we really want to have a society that doesn't value bullies, then we need to have policy and practice that begins to really teach in our schools as a mandatory thing, like the STEM curriculum, a mandatory thing, kindness and compassion. Because that's what might make a difference in the lives of people with disabilities and other forms of difference as they go forward. So those are just a couple of things that I like to think about and would love to see, if not the center, then some other groups get involved in looking at those things.
Well, first of all, congratulations. When I think about the work that CPR has done, I mean, I've been to things that are 30 and 40-year-old celebrations, and people always have a million stories and great stuff to say. But this is the real deal. I mean, I'm like stunned. I've known you like my entire adult life, and I'm still stunned at the coherence of your work and the passion and the clarity with which you approach big issues. You don't run from the hard stuff. So I just wanted to start, especially since we're in church, with a little grace and gratitude. I feel like it is grace that brings the leadership of CPR to CPR, and of all the things that you can be doing, that you're doing this, and that you're doing it for a long time, and you're doing it better than everybody else and along with everybody else. And I love you dearly, and I just wanted to say thank you for anything else that I might say that might be, silly. So I was thinking about my first interaction with CPR, and it was 1982, and Steve Schwartz called me, and he said, so what can you tell me about cost models in employment and mental health? And, interestingly, I actually had something to say, but I never would have thought, that's not the kind of question that gets asked that you think, well, now there's the beginning of maybe one of the most significant relationships in my life and decades of working with really great, smart, cool people who are doing really hard work, and I get to be part of it. So it's interesting to kind of reflect on that. Each of us have probably a million stories like that, but that was the first. And I was thinking about kind of the past and how that informs the future for CPR. I was reflecting on kind of what are the hallmarks of your work. And one of the hallmarks that has been enduring has been fidelity to people with disabilities, and stemming out of, I think, a profound sense of identification with who people are, and sort of how tortured it can be when people don't understand who you really are, and wanting to remedy that in coherent and kind and skillful ways. So as I was thinking about that, I was reflecting on what was going on in the context when CPR first started, and one of the things that really did kind of leaven the conversation along with the good work of CPR and others was actually Michael Kendrick's values-based training that he was doing that, as Kathy was saying, that sort of came out of Brewster, that people had the wisdom to bring along, Michael Hogan and, Michael Kendrick, and Hogan funded Michael Kendrick to do the values-based training, and that has made such a profound difference in the lives of people with disabilities, not just in the immediate scene here in Western Mass, but for all the people who got that training for over decades and literally over continents now. All that was really happening before Olmsted and the ADA. So those were great, catalysts for change. But this was happening before that. As Sue Jameson says, well, you were doing Olmsted before Olmsted. So that was all kind of going down, and it made me think that often the most significant moments in our lives happen, and we don't recognize it as such when it's happening. And the same can be said for a lot of the advocacy, I think, particularly in the earlier stages, that CPR was doing, that, you know, you're kind of going along, you're doing good work, you're in the hospitals, you're going, that's where people are stuck, so advocates and attorneys are in there, not just paying attention to the abuse, the neglect, the discrimination, the unrelenting, you know, and unnecessary segregation, but people's humanity. And sometimes more stunningly, being in the hospital and seeing people look straight through a person's humanity and not see it. And to hold on to that and embrace that and walk towards suffering as opposed to away from it. And so I was kind of thinking about that in terms of, you're right smack in the middle of making history, but I'm pretty sure you weren't thinking about it that way. You were doing the right thing. You said we have to have the right relationship to people and to our advocacy, and there has to be a coherence to that. And we have to really clearly see what are people up against, and what would be the potency of our advocacy that could begin to take on the kinds of harms that people were experiencing. So when I look back on that, one of the things that's stunning to me was that so early on in the game you figured it out. Not that you figured it out, you know, I mean, we're still figuring it out. Even the things that are settled, because there's so many ways to get it wrong. But I was reflecting on the fact that I don't think early on that you were as sort of saying, well, this could change the national landscape for everybody with disabilities, and yet your work has. I had the wonderful experience, as Kath was saying. I've worked on a few cases with CPR over the years, but most recently, great experience where there was very intentionally the thought that maybe this would change the landscape for people with disabilities nationally. And it was finally, you know, applying the ADA to employment, which has long been one of my passions, and it was a Lane case in Oregon. And it was so great, you know, to work with CPR on that case, because there was such clarity from the beginning that what we were looking at was making sure that the vision was making sure that people with disabilities had the same opportunities and choices that people without disabilities had. And that it wasn't, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, that's a shelter workshop case, that's a get people out of shelter workshops, which, you know, that may be, you know, one of the results may be that. But it wasn't so much about evacuating shelter workshops as much as significantly increasing competitive integrated employment for people and really understanding truly what integration means as it pertains to employment, and really making the segregated options obsolete. It was a big case, and also sort of cut off the pipeline for the current generation and future generations of youth going into segregation. It raised a lot of expectations around true integration, around people working at least 20 hours a week or more, having the same kind of benefits as everybody else who works that, you know, doesn't have a disability. So that was a great case. I think it was a little glimpse of the future for CPR in terms of saying some of those same elements that existed in that case kind of inform our thinking going forward. They were taking the lead in terms of organizing all the partners, which was significant. It was the Department of Justice, it was people with disabilities, it was family members, it was organizational plaintiffs, private firms, the subject matter experts, and which is no small task, because one of the things that they're particularly good at is including people who have a lot to contribute within the context of litigation who aren't used to operating in that venue. And that was extraordinary. And I think that's an area, you know, going forward that we really need CPR to continue to take the lead. So just moving forward, a few areas on my wish list. Bob has his. By the time you get to the end of the panel, you're going to realize that 14 people can't do everything. So in citizen advocacy, we always say the answer to what is who else needs to be involved. But, so of course, obviously, continuing to do high-impact litigation, and in that context, doing what you've been doing so well, which is bringing along young attorneys and mentoring people who do represent potentially the next wave of, I don't know if I can say Steve and Kathy and Bob, but really skillful and talented people with the kind of passion that you have to continue the work. Also, I mean, we saw Kurt Deckard for a minute. He didn't quite give you the credit you need, so I'll just say something that CPR has been invaluable to the P&A network. You have 57 organizations, some better than others, some days better than others, but it's like the largest free legal system for people with disabilities nationally, but the expertise isn't always necessarily there to bring the kind of cases we need to bring. I know I've counted on CPR in very significant ways on our big cases. And Bob, that gets to your wish list of racial issues. When you come to Georgia, that's always part of the case. In addition, I think we need to build a broader base of experienced people who can step up into the roles of being subject matter experts, being court monitors, special masters, independent reviewers, all of those roles. Donna talked a little bit about that. Linda Glenn talked a little bit about that. What does it really mean to be able to partner with people who have the sense of identification with people with disabilities and the talent and the experience that CPR has? I think especially for court monitors who aren't attorneys, you need to have an attorney to partner with to be able to effectively do your job within the context of litigation. On my wish list, I'd like to see you guys help to reinvigorate what we've come to call the ADA Litigators Group. It's a group of civil rights attorneys doing disability work who come together and talk strategy, share sort of foundational discussions with each other, not only about cases, but sometimes that have influence over the national initiatives, such as I would credit some of those early conversations of the ADA litigators for significantly influencing the HCBS settings rule and how that all played out. And I'm sure Allison's going to talk more about that. More employment work, of course. I wouldn't be Ruby if I didn't say you have to do more employment work. I'm personally thrilled that you're doing the employment work that you're doing, and I know that that's just the beginning, and that you're also looking at kind of the ancillary services, what happens for people when they're not working, to make sure that those aren't drivers towards segregation as well. One of the things that I really appreciate about CPR is that they address kind of the subtle and nuanced issues, such as more services is not the only or best answer to the question of what do people with disabilities need. Those things seem like remarkably obvious to us, but it doesn't appear that way too often to judges or sometimes to bureaucrats who are responsible for directing money in one way versus another. And I also want to say that I really appreciate that you don't run out of steam when it comes to implementation. You don't think, CPR doesn't think that when you win in court that that's it. Claim a victory, have the press release, and go home. Some of these cases go on forever, and I really appreciate that you pay attention to the developmental and preventive safeguards that you can build into your settlement agreements, and that you hang around through the implementation of the case to see all the twists and turns and ways that people can get it wrong or pervert your best ideas. And finally, just going back to your roots, I think that the past is calling for something in the future that speaks directly to what Bob was talking about, your supported decision-making work, that it's so critical in terms of people hanging on to control of the reins in their lives. And I'm just hoping that the more that you're learning through all of that work that's so important, that you'll then share those lessons and to instruct the field and teach them the lessons that people with disabilities are teaching us.
So first I want to say how incredibly honored I am and humbled I am to be in this room and to use Bob's analogy at the grown-up table, and to be on a panel in a room with the people who have been doing this for so long. I mean, this is the heart of the disability rights movement. This is the heart of the people who are the architects of the best and most progressive services that we have, and the most values-based thoughts around how do we partner and support and be allies to people with disabilities. And it's been so incredible to kind of hear this reflection on CPR. Clearly, the vision has not changed over those 40 years. I mean, a true vision of people with disabilities deserve the same respect and opportunities as people without disabilities, and maybe what that looks like has changed over time, but that guiding vision is incredibly clear. Anyone who knows CPR knows this is like one of the most thoughtful organizations, so having a very organized reflect back to look forward makes a whole lot of sense. And sometimes when I'm in the middle myself of this kind of disability movement and how far have we come, I kind of have to step back. And I just want to say on this incredible personal level, the 40-year history of CPR kind of ties with my personal experience through my sibling with the disability service system. And to know the world has gone from, as you guys know so firsthand, a world where it was all about put people away, we don't value them, there's somewhere else for them, to where we are now, to walk through those cases and be able to tie to really in a very personal way, oh gosh, they did this and that's why there was this opportunity for my brother, my family member. It's really, really incredible to think about. I've worked with CPR for over a decade as an ally, and yeah, I was wondering if I was going to get revoked from the panel now that I'm an internal person, but I'm mostly reflecting as a longtime ally and what I think is really the strengths of CPR and how to build off those. As you heard from everybody, CPR has clearly been a true leader in developing the law, and the law went from a tool of the Constitution, which people had to really intellectually think about how can we use this to kind of get at the horrors and abuse and mistreatment of people. CPR was key in kind of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Supreme Court decision in Olmstead that for the first time kind of gave some tools to not just fix institutions, but actually do what we all wanted to do, which is really build community opportunities. As Ruby said, and I have been personally a beneficiary, CPR is so intentional in its mentoring and building of a cadre of people to do this kind of work, and that's been an incredible role that it's played. And again, as you heard from Michael Hogan and others, kind of developing what does systems change look like at a practice level has been incredibly important. And of course, most importantly, CPR is so grounded in the lives of people with disabilities and the hundreds of thousands of people whose lives are better because of CPR. That is, always front and center at the work that CPR does. What I want to just talk about, and maybe it's a little self-serving because I think the tool that has been missing in the toolkit that CPR is so well positioned to do is taking its incredible lessons learned from its impact litigation, from its system change, and thinking about how do we really impact federal policy. And I think right now there's kind of a revolution that has been happening on the intersection of law and policy that, at least in my experience, hasn't really happened since the 1980s, where this first deinstitutionalization litigation was what drove federal policy to say, how do we actually create financing for community services? How do we create laws? What is it that different agencies should be doing? And I truly think the last 8 years, CPR has played this incredible role
Often partnering, I'll say this honestly, having been the person inside of DOJ, leading, helping kind of develop and move Olmsted, which in my experience has been actually what, for the first time, has been the driver of federal policy. As Ruby talked about, this idea of what do we mean by integration and using the ADA has really developed over time to get at all forms of segregation, and CPR has been a real leader in this. First the world was kind of broken into institution and community, and institution bad, community good. And then we started seeing there's lots of segregation in where people live in the community, how people spend their days, in education and employment, and CPR has really been a leader in thinking about that. And as CPR and others have helped develop the law, again, I think there's some prime opportunities for CPR to take what it's learning and influence federal policy. So just to give a few examples, I think what you have spent lots of time thinking through in your cases is, what do we really mean by true community integration? It's been a real struggle. We've heard today, it's not just moving from a big institution to a smaller restrictive setting that is, quote, in the community. And that's the same conversation that's happening at a federal policy level. These new rules that Ruby referred to that are tied to, we're only gonna pay for things that are actually really community integrated. This is the perfect place for a voice of CPR to be talking about what that looks like in their real experience. There's legislation, so we all know the world is, unfortunately, entitlements are on the institutional side and community is optional. And a lot of movement to really think about changing that. Actually introduce legislation. So the combination of people who understand, here's the pitfalls and the laws that we have, we need to make sure not to do that, really brings such an informed voice. Employment, as Ruby talked about, again, CPR, it kind of blows my mind that 40 years ago, you guys were thinking about that when I think the rest of the disability community in the last decade has had an aha moment and said, oh, actually, employment, that is key. If we want to have people with disabilities living real lives, not living in poverty, having real relationships with people, having opportunities to get out in the community, well, gosh, why have we not been talking about employment more? It's so the buzzword in DC. But I think you guys bring this real expertise and understanding the complexities of how to change a system that's kind of been about custodial care and family expectations of a place to go, to really thinking about how do we match people, how do we value people, and how do we work through all these questions and fears that people have. So again, legislation that's being passed. Ruby and I serve together on a kind of a policy working group that makes recommendations to Congress and Labor Secretary on where to go next. Again, an incredible voice that I think CPR can bring. Housing, criminal justice. All of these things are happening in DC with, frankly, lots of people having voices that are so in the values place, so in the intellectual place, and so disconnected from the practice. And that's such a unique voice. The supported decision making. Bob Fleischner and I just spent 2 days at a policy conference in DC, and everybody talks about the values, but no one except CPR can talk about what it actually looks like. So if that's the future, if that's the direction we're going to empower people with disabilities, then there needs to be the voice of people like CPR there. I think it's an incredible tool in the toolkit, and I'm really, really excited to be part of building off this incredible 40-year history and the expertise that you've developed, pushing it forward. The one last thing I will just add, because I know Ruby brought it up, Lynn Rucker, who wasn't able to be on the panel because a last-minute emergency was going to bring it up, is we really need to focus on building that cadre of experts, of court monitors, of people who really understand that. When I look around the room, I probably called everyone in this room in my time at DOJ to try to pull you into something. I mean, the people who are values-based, who have done this work, who have a deep belief in community is possible for everyone, they are few and far between. And they're pretty much, all their time is eaten up between all these cases now that we're doing. It's great that we're doing so much more work, but we need to build that next generation of people who understand system reform, who understand how to be dogged in getting things done, but also collaborative, as Donna talked about, and who are inculcated in values. I just don't think that's part of the culture as much as it was in the early disability rights movement. So I will just say I am invigorated. I am excited thinking about what's next for CPR. You know, hopefully a decade from now we'll have not only this history of litigation, but incredible policy achievements. We'll probably need 6 more billboards, and hold me to it. But I am so excited for the future of this organization and just so privileged to be in a place that is so grounded in values and in making the lives of people with disabilities better and real, and it's an incredible privilege.
Well, nobody wants to be the person that stands between all these people and the bar. Is there? Okay. Well, just to comment, as we're looking to the future we're headed into is not going to look at all like the future that we were looking at when CPR got started. It's important to remember that the world changes around us, and we've had the good luck CPR has to be alive at a time when there was a very widespread social movement that supported much of what CPR was fighting for. And you don't always see social movements in history. They do come and go. And in this case, I can't find another point in history, looking at the history of mental health and disability, where there's been so much progress. Possibly the moral treatment era in mental health, but this has been a remarkable and fortuitous period. So CPR has been able to do what it's been able to do because of this widespread social movement that got behind many of the things. Because if you're advocating for something and nobody's supporting you, you're toast. So in this sense, CPR is good because there were people supporting what CPR was saying. And we're at a point of vulnerability now because if you think a little bit ahead, we are having a change of generations. And Bob alluded to it in terms of the leadership succession issue, but it's a much bigger issue than just the leadership succession issue in CPR. We've had a movement that has not prepared for its replacement with the next wave of a movement. And that is, maybe when you had such a progressive several generations, you can't do everything. But it is good to point out that we're not doing everything, that we do not have any assurance that the millennials are going to take up this cause. So one of the things that is going to be strategically important is to reach out to the young who do have 50 years ahead of them, 60 years of work, and to just really hand off the baton as well as we can. Otherwise, they may feel unwelcome in our movement and go looking for other movements that are more to their liking. So I think there's a period of time where the generations cross over. We're quite late into that crossover. And I think it's important and almost urgent that we get some very good young people involved with CPR, but more broadly, I think, in many of the other aspects of our movement. Second thing is that we have quite a lot of advocates, but they're often advocating for the wrong things. So it's not just that there be advocacy, the message of the advocate has to be on the money, has to have a certain moral clarity to it. And CPR has grown in its moral clarity about what are good answers, partly because it takes the time to think through what are good answers to some of the harm that we see done. It's not enough to just name the harm, it's also to think about what the remedy would look like. And I think to have 40 years and to have so few regrets about some of the remedies you've been part of is quite a gift, really. And perhaps maybe there's even more reason to emphasize this going forward, that period where people have had to look at very carefully, are we proposing a remedy here that is really going to have some worth to it and that will actually make a difference. Second here, there it is. The economy that we're in now isn't the economy we were in when CPR got started. In fact, we're in a very precarious economy. We had very little growth in the economy. We have very, very high, unprecedented levels of inequality. We have a very kind of a renaissance of racism and discrimination in our society. Many people are coming along trying to build on that fear and so on. And so I think it's not a very fortuitous time to be providing leadership. The conditions aren't going to be favorable, even if we do come up with remedies. There's many of the governments are essentially broke at this point. So we can't look to those resources being there, that the people that should be paying taxes, all their money's sitting in Panama and places like that. All of our corporations are there. There's nobody to tax anymore except the people that don't have work. And we're going to have a whole generation coming forward that have very uncertain work prospects. So I think in this sense, what CPR may need to do is adapt to very inhospitable societal conditions going forward. And that's a different challenge. We've had very favorable decades, really, many of those in the economic sense. But I don't think we can count on that going forward. And I'm not saying this to kind of be such a downer, but just, even though I am. But rather to look with clarity at what we're up against, or may be up against, and to have strategies that are as good as the challenges that we face. Even the systems that we have built, of course, all good things do get corrupted, and do, if you don't renew them, become part of another generation's problems. So we also have this challenge of these systems are now a massive conglomeration of vested interests. It's very hard to, as Mike Hogan was saying, others are saying, to make it all turn out right. So in this sense, even the remedies now could come back to bite us as being something we now have to keep even more honest than we did another time. So as you can see, I'm really speaking to the kind of leadership that might be needed going forward. I think this is the key issue for CPR to look at. What kind of leadership is good up against these kinds of challenges? Because you want to have a match between the type of legal and moral leadership and the particular challenges that we face. Because it's quite possible to be winning the battle that we're no longer in, rather than to rise to the battles that are going to come at us, and of course for the next generation that's coming. Now, in that regard, I think some of the suggestions the team has made here that have spoken on these panels has been quite significant in terms of what we can do. And just to kind of pull out a few of the points that I heard, one was of course, the next generation of leadership, and not just within CPR, but more broadly. In every area of content, we're going to need a different kind of leader than we've had. And again, one of the things CPR has been very good at is putting in a fair bit of capacity building into its remedies. And without the human capacity, the legal victories are quite empty. You need the right kind of people that can take these ideas and get traction with them. Second thing that is also very important is people have mentioned it repeatedly, and it's very important to highlight it, and that is that CPR has been very good with alliances. People use different words for this, sometimes partnership, but it's really alliances, that we never do well when we try to do it all ourselves. We do much better when we join up with others, and I think the kinds of alliances really that CPR has made are very instructive, and I don't think will go out of form at all. They're going to be as vital as they've ever been. There are some areas, though, everybody has their pet ideas that they'd like to see things done on, and I think one of the things that we've done tacitly in many of the cases is actually to bring leading edge practice into the solution. In this sense, we have all kinds of leading edge practice in mental health and disability that everybody's ignoring. And yet the practices, the evidence is there, and CPR, in a sense, plays a role of directing people to these practices that are not yet widely adopted. And that's very important because we have just made terrific innovations and pilots on this, that, and the other. But what is the good of it if people don't benefit in a large scale from those kinds of leading edge things? Again, it was touched on, people, when they get up in the morning, say, oh, I wish I could have a nice service. I don't think that's what people say. They'd say, I'd like to have a nice life. We now have lots of people that have a good service but don't have much of a life. And I think we've got to get the focus back on getting a life rather than just the issue of supports. That's a big challenge, of course. But the very absence, in many cases, of people having natural supports in their life is very instructive. That they're surrounded by paid people, but they don't have just ordinary people interested in them. And this has got to be part of future remedies. The solution to everything isn't more services. The solution might be more community. And we need a different kind of way of operating to mobilize community than to mobilize governments or mobilize agencies or systems. So I think it's a kind of generational piece of work that we've got ahead of us. And I just want to plant that seed. It's not a new seed, but it's just to highlight it. Also, I think we've done a very good job of making sure people have mini institutions of their choice. We've now proliferated many institutions of one kind or another in the name of remedies and good policy and so on. But again, people weren't asking for many institutions, they were asking for no institutions. And we now have institutions for one, what we call personalized institutions, in that sense that people do have an individual arrangement that's quite institutional. And so this whole issue of custodialization in the community is we've got to get our hands around it because we have people that are in the community, have support, and again, it's quite a custodial existence. And this is the kind of challenge that's a generational challenge, probably several generations, but it'd be very, it's going to have to be addressed in some form or fashion. The last thing to draw attention to, I think, is again, many of the comments made thus far sort of address this, and that is that sometimes it isn't really, advocacy isn't really about winning. It's about being the voice that calls it the way it is, so that the greatest benefit of advocacy may be truth, that the truth be known, even if we can't prevail in terms of winning. So in this sense, who is going to call it what it is a very important role. It's a prophetic role in society. It's a role that CPR has often played. It's a role that many people have played. But it's very important to align CPR with that role where is the role of truth about people's lives and our society? Where is that lodged? And how might we, in some way, join in calling things what they need to be called so that we can solve them as they should be solved?